Okay, I had some success with this headphone and hopefully it'll continue with this one as well. So we read the background. As I said, I've been supremely brief and you need to follow up. I'll also be brief with the conclusion because the final points are summarized nicely. The discussion, which is long again, cut short. Discussion: studying climate mitigation or the lack thereof through a series of thematic lenses allows us to sketch the contours of a highly multidimensional problem, arguably rooted in many different realms, from the political to the cultural, the material to the epistemological, the origin of knowledge itself. The lenses offer, oops, what did I do? The lenses offer different views that at times are complementary, overlapping, contrasting, and occasionally contradictory. Nonetheless, this exercise reveals a series of insights as to why we have failed to bend the global emissions curve, as well as critical questions for further research and action on climate change. Seems obvious once you read it as to why we are failing, and yet it's good to have it, you know, framed properly with all the angles, dimensions that the problem has. The clustering of the 9 lenses provided a simple heuristic from which one particularly prominent feature of historical and ongoing lock in to high carbon development pathways stood out, namely power. Multiple forms of power and its expressions are evident across the 9 lenses, including the entrenched institutional power featured strongly in the Davos cluster, the instrumental forms of power emphasized by the enabler cluster, and the power of ideas as foregrounded by the ostrich and phoenix cluster. Building from this base, section 6.1, which I'm going to skip, seeks to elicit more nuanced reasons for underpinning the resilience, sorry, elicit more nuanced reasons underpinning the resilience of current emissions trends to change. Basically, we are a human system and we are, incapable of collective action, evolutionarily speaking. So these social imaginaries have to somehow get beyond our evolutionary handicaps. Conclusion, just to read one paragraph. This article has demonstrated that while the reasons for 30 years of failure to bend the global emissions curve are multifaceted, a common and strong thread is woven through them all, its various guises and to differing in various guises and to differing degrees. The centralization of power and the privileges that accompany it have coalesced around a particular worldview. Through recent decades, the central tenets of this worldview have evolved into a wider global zeitgeist, the forceful story whereby development and progress are reduced to economic growth and defined by increasingly narrow financial metrics and indices. So that's a obvious thing, intuitive thing, and yet it comes in so many channels, through so many channels, in the name of development, in the name of assistance for development, in the name of the need for development, and so on and so forth. Coincident with this financial reductionism and economic characterization of nations and societies has been a growing recognition that the system externalities are set to undermine the very tenets of the system. Externality is something that seems completely unrelated, and yet it has the power to directly have an impact, like smoking and second-hand smoking, right? Or crop burning here and health impacts elsewhere. So many examples. Thus far, however, the power and inertia of the existing system have been sufficient to give the impression of ongoing control. The challenges are recognized and internalized, and through promised technical futures that are carefully costed in elaborate models, and the existing power structures remain unchallenged. So integrated assessment models with their fancy scenarios may give you a sense that with CCUS, bioenergy, EVs, and policies and so on, we are going to be able to hit this 1.5 degree C target or the 2 degree C target and so on and so forth. In the meantime, real world with all its power games is going in a completely different way. However, even if people can at least temporarily be steered to ignore physical reality, the same is not true for of the natural systems on which human societies ultimately depend. Essentially, we can make all kind of fancy model scenarios, but the real world is responding with what we are doing and not with what we are saying or what we are modeling. Even if people can, okay, already repeated that for whatever reason. Uh, so while this article set out to shed some light on why we have failed to bend the global emissions curve, what has become apparent is that the very stability of the current zeitgeist, with its deep reliance on escalating and centralized energy used, looks set to be its downfall. So this kind of extinction stories also need some care, because you have to figure out whether a downfall is imminent with the way we are doing things, or the way we are doing things itself will find a solution to get us out of this, right? The changes locked into Earth's natural systems and the scale and rapidity of change now required of human societies can no longer be reconciled with the massaged form of the status quo. So can we continue with the economic development and somehow keep saying, no, no, we will manage to deal with climate change, or is it doomed to fail? In a real sense, a critical tipping point has emerged. Again, it's a kind of a qualitative argument. Whatever direction is chosen, the future will be a radical departure from the present. That's true. We have colonized the future for sure. Societies may decide to instigate rapid and radical changes in their emissions at rates and in ways incompatible with the zeitgeist, or climate change will impose sufficiently chaotic impacts that are also beyond the stability of the zeitgeist. Within both of these futures, the existing power structure and paradigm associated with the Davos cluster are simply unfit for the purpose. So let's read the Davos cluster again. So here is the Davos cluster. The Davos cluster engages the three lenses of international climate governance, the vested interests of the fossil fuel industry, and the entrenched nature of geopolitics and militarism, to explore how effective mitigation has been and continues to be obstructed. So basically, business as usual is not going to help. Let's define formally the zeitgeist. I said it's the most forceful story of your life, of your times, or whatever. But in reality, zeitgeist is a noun that defines the spirit and mood of a particular period of history, as shown by the ideas and beliefs of the time. The story captured the zeitgeist of the late 1960s. So it's the most prominent paradigm by which the society is living, or your life is happening. So let's read off the summary points and then the issues that remain in the next slide. Despite 3 decades of political efforts and scientifically informed warnings of the likely catastrophic effects of climate change, CO2 emissions have continued to rise globally and are 60% higher today than they were in 1990, the baseline for negotiations. Since the first IPCC report was published in 1990, more anthropogenic fossil fuel CO2 has been released into the atmosphere than previously throughout all of human history. The failure of leadership, particularly from within high emitting countries, sectors, corporations, and individuals, has locked in intergenerational suffering and long-term existential threats to livelihoods and ecosystems. So this idea of lock-in is what I said, or the word, the descriptor that many people use, called we have colonized the future. Basically, your kids, grandkids, their future is altered by us already, and even if we do mitigation, it'll still give them a new reality, right? It may be a better social imaginary, more sustained and cleaner water, air, etc., but still it's what they are getting from us. Entrenched geopolitical, industrial, and military power and associated mindsets are fundamental barriers to effective mitigation. Orthodox schools of thought and research traditions, including highly constrained forms of modeling, particularly in the fields of economics, energy, and climate mitigation, need to be challenged and replaced with or complemented by more heterodox approaches. Okay, don't believe the models blindly. 3 decades of choosing to fail on mitigation have shifted the climate challenge from a technocratic adjustment to business as usual to requiring a rapid system level change within both industrialized and industrializing societies. Transformations toward more sustainable and just futures require a radical reconfiguration of long run socio-cultural and political economic norms and institutions as well, currently reproducing the very problems driving climate change. So here is where you have to again go back and look at the podcasts on evolutionary traits that may be handicapping us towards this required urgent global collective action. Attention to equity, high carbon lifestyles, and conditions for enabling new social imaginaries has the potential to disrupt dominant high carbon development pathways. Again, the question is, will it happen? How will we make it happen? So, the future issues then, how could geopolitical competition over energy resources and ideologies of control that frame dominant responses to climate change be challenged and overcome? We are still in that track of dominating resources or making profits from the resources that you have. How have mainstream economics and neoliberal responses to climate change, for example, carbon market and a broader financialization of the environment, become so pervasive, and what opportunities, how have they become so pervasive, and what opportunities are there for alternative or complementary approaches? How can research approaches currently dominating advice and underpinning climate mitigation policies, such as integrated assessment modeling, be complemented with a more varied array of approaches and perspectives? This is very important because we are so hung up on these models, which, they are models. As one statistician whose name escapes me said, all models are wrong, but some are useful, so now it's time to question whether these are even useful. How could approaches that rapidly reduce energy related emissions be realized, such as actively displacing and disassembling fossil fuel based energy systems, the lock ins, and energy demand management practices? How can the large asymmetry in responsibility for emissions within as well as between nations be addressed in climate policy and governance? So it's not just nation to nation competition and comparison, but within a nation, what are the poor people doing and what are the rich people doing? How can fossil fuel based high carbon lifestyles, practices, and visions of incremental mitigation be rapidly replaced by sustainable alternatives and profound system change informed by a timely response to the Paris temperature and equity commitments? How can knowledge systems and institutions currently reproducing the very problems driving climate change be transformed? How can existing and new social movements mobilize popular power and social imaginaries in a way that effectively challenges the status quo and helps drive structural change at the scale and pace required? This is the most fundamental thing. The scales of things required now are so large that the question of whether we are capable at all socially, technically, economically, but also evolutionarily, that's the fundamental question that is facing us, because we know the writing on the wall, but we just don't know how to deal with it, right? So we know that the current lifestyles cannot continue without making everything worse and worse. And now there are no winners and losers. Everybody is going to lose at this point, because let's say Siberia was this example I use all the time. Siberia was going to get warm and become a wheat field, but Russia is facing droughts after droughts. Heat waves are coming as well. So the dream of growing more wheat in a cold place that is now full of snow is not really realizable with the way things are going. Okay, so keep all those things in mind. These are a lot of normative questions because the lenses cover science, technology, but also society, values, politics, power, profit motives, not just individuals but corporations, countries, and it's just the value systems we carry. So global commons, sustaining them is a very different challenge than sustaining commons at smaller scales that Eleanor Ostrom's work so elegantly shows that is possible, in the sense that sustaining the commons with norms and punishments is possible, but only at smaller scales. Global scales, we have no idea, and this is a challenge that we have to face. Okay, that's in the context of already failing on mitigation. Okay, so I'll come back and meet in the next topic.